Hey there. This is going to be kind of a long video. I'm going to start by summarizing the overall point of the video and then going to go into the details. But I'd really appreciate it if you stayed through the whole thing. So the summary is, we've been working on this new version of Sentinels. Originally, it was kind of conceived as a thing like the StarCraft single-player campaign or the Smash Brothers single-player campaign, where it's fun, but it's also like an extended tutorial for the multiplayer. And in setting that up, we made it work so that it was something where Plas can go into can edit things himself. So there's a big Google sheet where all the levels you're playing against are written down as like incursion levels, and all the rewards you get are there as well. You can write the logic for all those yourself. Plas can write them for himself, and when there's a bug, he can fix it. And Plas brought this idea up, and I think, more and more we've been thinking it's a really good idea. We didn't want to tell you too early because people have a tendency to, when we announce a feature, start developing for it before it's even clear like what it's going to be. But the idea is that anybody can create their own single-player campaign, and then Collective, especially the beginning of playing Collective, becomes a lot more like a create your own Slay the Spire, Mario Maker type experience, but for Slay the Spire, where the players are making their own campaigns. And the real twist there, I think, is that it has to be good in a way that you may not be used to. It has to be really accessible and playable. And I think there's sort of a paradigm shift here, which has to happen, where we go from, I guess I'd say, we all, myself included, go from amateur game designers to real game designers, where we're actually trying to make something where somebody can pick it up and enjoy it with very little prior knowledge. If we do that, then we have a really strong interest in launching the product again, spending more money on another round of PR, trying to really promote it, and I think it has a pretty good chance of kind of making the whole thing turn around. That's the idea, at least. Okay, summary's done. Collective is a game where players create all the cards and vote on them, vote on the balance, and that sort of thing. And that does not seem, in retrospect, like something like, there's a reason that there's no other game that's like that. It's because I don't think it's possible to start there. I think it's possible for us to get there. Basically, I think the best way to talk about this would be to start by talking about the history of the game and how it started. When we first made the game, we got, I think I've mentioned this before, but we got like extremely good cost per click, like ad interest. And I'm talking like literally 100 to 500 times better than most ads are expected to perform. And we sort of saw similar things when we went to GDC. We kind of went to GDC not even having like a real ticket. We just went to like some of the events, and we talked to people, and there were like a pretty good number of people who, when we told them the premise for this game, for Collective, they said, okay, I want to play this right now. It was about maybe 10 to 20% of people but when we explained the idea behind it, they were so interested that they were like, okay, there's a big difference between like, oh, that sounds cool, and sign me up for this. Like their eyes get all big and stuff. And we saw like 10 to 20% of people doing that. And the ad buy was as if when we showed, 100 people that ad, 10 to 20% of people had that reaction. It's like 10 to 20% of people like saw that and clicked on the actual ad, which is crazy. It's like totally unheard of. And we launched the game, and when it was like really not working, there weren't that many features. It immediately had like 100 daily active players. Which is a really, really positive sign for a game like this, which kind of breaks all the conventions of multiplayer games. Is that like it was pretty bad there were a bunch of features missing, and it still had like 100 people playing every day. Then we added more features. We added like an economy. We added a way to like buy blueprints. Blueprints weren't in the game originally. That's why they're called blueprints and not just like cards that you own. We added more heroes. We added more single player modes. We added like a ton of stuff. And right up until the launch of the game, there were like 100 players playing a day. So it was like, it didn't matter what we did. The numbers like stayed the same. After maybe like a month after the launch of the game, there was still 100 daily active players. That means 100 different people playing a day, right? 100 logins a day. Which, by the way, like if that looks high to you, it's because like a lot of them are just playing single player content, which is kind of another big surprise. A lot of people just really like playing the single player content in Collective. So it's kind of surprising like how many people just want to play like a single player experience that's like pretty fun, but don't even necessarily want to interact with the overall like structure of the game. So anyway, we launched the game. The number of players was the same, and you probably noticed this if you were in the community, like before and after. Like it really always felt the same. There's always been like a few dozen people in the Discord and that sort of thing. And you're not imagining that. It's always basically been the same. And then the funny thing is that we got really discouraged. We were like, this isn't enough people to make the game financially successful enough for us to like quit jobs and like work on it full time. Because it seems like there's no potential for growth. So, the game's probably just going to die when we stop making features for it. And we were really discouraged. We like didn't work on it for a long period of time. And we came back and we saw that there's like 3 months later, we hadn't done anything. We hadn't like added any heroes or anything. And there was like still, I guess 2 months later, there were still 100 people playing every day. And so we were like, okay, I guess we should do the season 2 stuff and see what happens. But that was when we started to really rethink like what we were going to do to make it so it worked. But the obvious thing was like, we needed like a single player campaign that's fun on its own. That was the original idea. And it's not because the cards weren't balanced well enough. It's not because the archetypes weren't cool enough. It's not because the art wasn't good enough. It's just I think that the 100 daily active players is just the number of people who are there and able to make 10 cards a week, because there's nothing else that's like this. There's no other like product where, some number of people is just always the number of people who are doing these things. There's no like deflationary player population thing. It's just like either everybody's playing a game or nobody's playing a game, except for a couple niche games where people like, for example, Space Station 13 is a good one, where the source code got leaked and people were like making their own versions of it. Trackmania is another good one. That game, famously, the developer said, "We've never lost a fan," which is like, I'm a fan of Trackmania, and that's true. Like, I still come back and play Trackmania sometimes. I'm never not going to be a fan of Trackmania. It's just really fun, and that's like a game where the player's making the content. And so I think there's something to that. Like, once you've learned how to make the content, you're never going to unlearn how to make the content. And then sometime you'll be like, I have this idea for a thing. That's why people come back to Collective and they're like, what's been going on for the last year, But the multiplayer thing means that it's always a competition. So it does have a ceiling of like how many hours people can spend making stuff for Collective a week, right? I think another big problem that we had was just that the competitors are these multiplayer games like Hearthstone and Magic. So the thing about multiplayer games is that they don't really have the same competitive field that single player games do. And I think there's a couple examples I can think of where it's really obvious. Easy one is World of Warcraft. And this is also an example of how a bunch of people got this really wrong. World of Warcraft came out, MMOs are really popular again, and a bunch of people said, we're going to make our own MMO. None of those work. PUBG comes out, completely takes over basically multiplayer gaming for like 6 months, and then Fortnite comes out and basically takes over multiplayer gaming. Obviously, that's an exaggeration, but they did both break like every record related to game sales at the time. And you can see it right now because there's no Pepsi to Among Us's Coca-Cola. Everybody just plays Among Us, and this is not because it's always a winner-take-all market, but I can tell you that there is another game that's like Among Us that is based on these hidden roles things, because hidden roles is an extremely well-established genre in board games. Werewolf, Mafia, Resistance games have been around for a really long time, and there have been video game attempts. I can tell you without even looking it up. There have been other games that are like Among Us, but Among Us just happened to be the one that caught on. And the thing is, it doesn't even necessarily mean it's a better game. It's just first mover advantage. Basically, when people are trying to play a multiplayer game, they want to play the game that everybody else is playing because everybody else knows about it. They don't have to say, oh, there's this game that's like Among Us, but it's different. You're already losing your friend's interest. You know what I mean? And you also, you want the community. You want to be looking at the memes and enjoying them. You want to be watching videos of stuff where your favorite content creators are playing this game as well. And if they're playing some, game called Not Among Us, and it's, whatever, some competitor to Among Us, then it's not one big party where everybody's invited. Now there's two parties and you have to choose one, and people will disagree about which one the best is. Now, this is the most obvious when it comes to streamers. Streamers are somebody where it's not a question of what do I want to play to have fun. It's a financial decision because they are one of the very few people who, everybody wants to be an influencer and become popular on the internet, doing something fun and interacting with the community and that sort of thing. But there's not very many people that get to do that, especially not getting paid a living wage. So when somebody comes to them and says, hey, try out this indie multiplayer game, I can tell you right now, it did not occur to them, oh, maybe I will like this so much that I will stop playing Hearthstone for 40 hours a week. If they have an audience that is paying them money to play Hearthstone 40 hours a week, they are not going to say, well, I'll put that off for a month and learn about this meta of this other game that even if they have heard of it, it's like a big financial decision. It's like getting a new job, basically. And so for that reason, there's a ton of barriers in the way for a multiplayer game. And when you want to make a new multiplayer game and you really want it to be a big hit, well, you can look at what Riot did with Legends of Runeterra. Legends of Runeterra, they established early on, we are going to pump millions, like like $100 million into this thing. So there's going to be money there, And if you're a streamer, you're already good at Magic or Hearthstone. Why not try it out? There's some number of people who are going to get some of this money. There's some number of people who are going to get some of this money. It might as well be you. And that obviously was never on the table for us. However, what I think is possible is that single player, especially user-generated single player, could be successful in a way that the Collective has not been so far, for exactly the reasons that I just described. Streamers, for example, can try it out, and if it's fun, within 30 seconds or something, they'll understand, okay, this is the point of this experience. I'm immediately, I'm getting this controlled experience where they're showing me something really early on that makes it all make sense, what I'm actually getting out of this. And the way that I'm thinking that would happen in Collective is, okay, imagine this. It's the first time you're installing Collective. You don't really know what to expect. It's the community-created card game. Well, what does that mean? Because a lot of people go in and they don't even really understand the whole idea because it's pretty complicated, right? And the thing that we eventually arrived at, which is people vote on 10 cards that get added to a multiplayer experience, that's not necessarily what the community-created card game means. So they try it out, and before they've even logged in and made an account, they install the thing, they open it up, and it says, hey, play this card game. Here's 9 choices to pick from. And it's like the top 9 highest-rated, beginner-friendly, player-created campaigns. And they're all sort of roguelite, Slay the Spire type thing. But the first one is themed around how you are an army of desserts and cakes, and you're trying to destroy all the fruits and vegetables in the world and overrun them with sugariness, right? The second one is you're trying to escape from your yandere girlfriend, and it's a long campaign about that. The third one is the actual Aesthetica campaign, and it's all Aesthetica. You know, like it takes place in a cyberpunk setting. You get introduced to different factions and the lore behind them, and it's not something where you're constantly switching between the lore between all these different worlds. It's just like, this is the Aesthetica thing. And then if they want a medieval Japan themed one, they can pick the Yamato campaign and that sort of thing. And these are all really easy to pick up, and really early on it establishes, okay, this is the game you're playing and this is the theme, and it's funny, or it's beautiful and the art is really beautiful, or it's unintuitive, or it's memey, or it's or whatever, you know, or it's cool, right? Like Aesthetica would be cool. So they see these, and immediately they're like, wow, okay. The immediate impression is, okay, I get it. Collective can be practically anything. And then they pick one. And now here's the second part of that. If they pick one and they don't like it, they are not thinking, oh, I don't like collective. They're thinking, well, maybe it's my fault. This is, by the way, like a game design trick that people don't really talk about very much. But if you make it so that when people do something, if there is like there's always a possibility for a negative experience, and if they blame themselves for it, then they don't hate your game, right? So they pick something, maybe they don't like it, and they're like, oh, well, maybe it's my fault because I picked the wrong one. I thought I wanted something funny, but it's getting old, or I thought I want something beautiful, but I want something funny, right? And then they go back and pick another one, as opposed to just giving up on the whole thing, because, you know, it could be anything, right? They've already understood that idea. Another important thing here, and this is maybe a surprise. The campaigns, the beginner-friendly campaigns, which not all of them will be beginner-friendly, right? But the beginner-friendly campaigns will actually have to have a tutorial for collective in the first few levels. And that is probably not what you're thinking of as a tutorial, but it's something where it is an experience that doesn't say like, hey, here's what this thing is, here's what that thing is. It's a version of the game where it's basically impossible for them to lose, or it's very hard for them to lose. There's not that many decisions they can make. And then by the end of playing for this, through this for a while, they can feel confident about their ability to play this game collective. And that's in big contrast to the way that the game works right now, which is basically there's a tutorial which we spent a lot of time on, and I basically think is kind of bad for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that when you start it up, it says, okay, we're going to teach you about this world, Wanderstar, which you don't really care about. And then the goal of the tutorial is you play enough of the game, and you know the mechanics are good, but the game itself you don't really care that much about, because we don't have the budget to make like a really awesome opening experience. And then the mechanics of the game are good, and you ultimately get to multiplayer, which takes like a week or a couple of weeks to like get into and sort of understand. That's a really difficult experience. When it comes to making a experience for somebody who has never played a game before, I think a really instructive example is the first level of Super Mario Brothers, the original Super Mario Brothers. A lot of you have probably heard about how when the game came out, the entire idea of a console video game was in question, and Nintendo said, okay, we need to make something that's really good. But they didn't just say, okay, go make a really, really good game. Miyamoto had this idea of taking the level and the game and grabbing random people who had never even played. He hands them the controller, and they play it, and maybe they die on the first Goomba or something like that. And he says, oh, okay, well, let's adjust this. Then he makes it so that it's kind of set up in a way so that you naturally end up jumping on the first Goomba. And then he hands it to somebody else, and maybe they die in the same way, and he does that again, or they get past that, and then they are introduced to other concepts such as coins and super mushrooms and that sort of thing. Within the first screen of Super Mario Brothers, you end up learning almost everything you need to know about the entire game, and that's something that Nintendo does a lot, because Nintendo's market is generally people who don't play games. Almost, they play games so rarely that they don't even remember, the basics from the last time they tried to play a video game. Their market is also people who play a lot of video games, but I think that an important thing here is that those people just kind of breeze through these opening things, and they don't really have a problem with it, because there's not a bunch of things that stop you and say, hey, this is what a super mushroom is. You should get them when possible. They come out of blocks. Blocks, that's not what happens at all. You just kind of fumble around, and then you end up doing the right thing eventually. There's another game designer who he's one of the designers for the Ratchet & Clank series, and he said that a video game puzzle is a series of levers where one of them opens the next door, and they all go one way. If you give somebody a new game and they're trying to learn it for the first time, you kind of want to make it so that the things that they do are neutral or positive. And when there's positive, it clearly says like, oh, you did the right thing in this situation. Keep going. That's something that still a lot of games don't really do right. Now, I think it may not seem immediately obvious how this would even relate to a card game, because card games basically are things where you have to sit down and learn a bunch about them at the beginning. But so it's not really an achievable goal to say like, oh, let's make a card game where people try playing the game and within like 10 minutes they've figured out everything they need to know about the game ever, and they never have to read any text again. That's unrealistic, especially because reading text and understanding it is like part of the fun part of card games. However, I think that it's really good to keep that in mind as an ideal. Like basically, the ideal for a beginner-friendly campaign in Collective would be one where you could hand it to your mom or your uncle or your sibling who doesn't really play video games that much, or somebody who plays a lot of video games but they don't play a lot of card games, like Hearthstone. Something like that. You hand it to them and they can at least get through it. That is actually, again, that's not necessarily what everybody, that's not what everybody should shoot for. We need some campaigns for people who really like card games and are really into the genre themselves. that's obviously really important, and because like that's what to an extent I think that's what we are already very good at. But we also need something where anybody can pick it up and enjoy it. And that's because not everybody is going to come into this game with the same level of prior knowledge. And we want to make a game where everybody can enjoy it, basically. Because if there's a really easy campaign, then, that's good for, it's not necessarily good for you, but it's good for somebody. And that person will eventually learn enough that it won't be good for them anymore, and they'll want to go to a harder thing. It seems basic, but this is something that I think we really, really need to hit, because card games are inherently a kind of unfriendly genre in the first place. And I think there's a real potential with this comes back to how I've never found somebody where my friends, my parents, my I don't know, coworkers and stuff like that. I can talk to them about this thing, and I can explain the idea behind Collective, and they can say, okay, show me some of the cards once they get it. And I can show them a card, I can get to a point where I show them a card and they're like, whoa, that's really cool. Or, oh, that's really funny. I love that idea. Something like that. That is something that we already do. In a way, you don't really need to worry about it, because a lot of it's already been proven that you guys can do something that is so funny or cool or beautiful or novel that basically anybody is able to take a look at something and find it appealing. The other reason that this is really critical is that the overall plan is that we release a version of New Sentinels where people can make their own campaigns. People start making their own campaigns, and then once we've got a good chunk of them and they're really fun and there's no bugs in them and that sort of thing, we can start to present that in the game and say, hey, do you want to play Squawk Walker's campaign? Do you want to play Blaine's campaign, etc. Right? And then we can have that be something that gets brought to before people even log in. So when they install the game for the first time, it says, hey, this is Collective, try this out. If you're really a beginner, you don't know anything about card games, try this thing out. If you're pretty used to card games, then you could try this one out. It will get you up to speed on the mechanics that are unique to Collective really quickly. Or it won't. It'll just be the Dark Souls. Okay, yeah, it's an old joke, but I think the opportunity for the Dark Souls of card game of digital card games is appealing, because some people don't want to play Slay the Spire on normal difficulty for 20 hours to get to the part where it's really challenging. Some people want to just get in and be like, this is impossible immediately, and I'm dying all the time. One of the other reasons we need campaigns, which are really easy for anybody to pick up and play, is because I have this idea of approaching, for the marketing, people who stream art on Twitch. My idea is that, well, first of all, there's a lot of people that do that, and a lot of people watch them do that. And I think that a lot of them are just kind of, some of them are professional artists and everything they're doing is they're getting paid for. But there's a lot of people who are just kind of drawing stuff for fun. And there's some people who are drawing stuff and they want to make a career out of it. And for those people, I think that this is kind of a potential project. Like, hey, you can make the art for this campaign, and it can be a lot of art. You're working a lot on this, and it all becomes part of a large project that you can kind of show off to somebody and say, hey, look, I did all of the art for this. I'm not only good at making this one piece of art, but this kind of cohesive world with logic and lore behind it. And imagine how much fun that would be, right? We already have things that are approaching that right now with some artists, I don't know, I'm thinking of Płapka has a ton of lore in Swiatlo, and very consistent art style, and honestly is like too big for our realm. You know, there's a ton going on there, and it seems like it would be appropriately sized for a really thematic campaign, really. And my idea there specifically is, I'm not entirely sure about the feasibility of this, but I think that it might be a good idea to try, instead of marketing, okay, we're going to pay people, here's like this amount of money to stream playing Collective. I think that just paying artists to stream art that they are making for Collective actually seems like it could work. And then I think that those people are naturally going to want to try the game out and say, okay, well, what does this world feel like? You know, what is this world that I've been making this art for actually like? And we want to make sure that they not only can play it and enjoy it after they've learned, like, you know, a bunch of stuff, but like they can pick it up and have a pretty good time almost immediately. So somebody who has never really played Collective before, but really knows a lot about digital card games, and somebody who doesn't really know a lot about digital card games and is playing Collective for the first time, and somebody who is streaming Collective for the first time, and somebody who is watching a stream of Collective for the first time. All these people basically have the same desire going in, which is, I want to see something novel or cute or interesting within like 15 seconds, within like 15 seconds of loading the game up. And that's not something necessarily that our game really provides right now. Like, we tried to do that by making the very first tutorial have a part where you draft cards, and it says like, oh, you know, this is sort of a normal fantasy world, but then there's some cards thrown into it. And I think what this allows us to do is say, forget the normal fantasy world, forget the 3 minutes and all the exposition and stuff like that it gets to get there. This is just a card game where people are making wacky stuff and cool art and that sort of thing, and you can just jump right in. So in conclusion, our goal is to release the new version of Sentinels in Q1. I think that's kind of a safe estimate, but Q1. We're going to quickly follow up with the ability to try player-made campaigns out. There will be a bunch of bugs. We'll fix those. There will be a bunch of other bugs that we caused while fixing the first set of bugs. We'll fix those, but eventually we get to a point where people can trade these URLs to their campaigns. By the way, just to be clear, like it's like this thing you're doing in Google Sheets. It's probably not going to be very pretty. We thought at first with the game, half of the work of the game would be teaching people how to use the editor. So I may be overestimating how hard it is, considering that everybody basically figured it out within a week. But, you know, we make it so that you can try to make your own single player campaigns out. There will be a while where people are getting used to the system, and I think that there's a couple follow-up features that wouldn't be that hard. The really obvious ones to me would be making it so that you can change the map to be a map that you drew, change the board to a board that you drew. And it's really those two things, because when you have those, then once somebody's in your campaign, you can make it so that almost every piece of art that they're looking at is from a thing that you did and you imagined as part of this world. So it's a cohesive experience. And it might even just be a texture swap, like maybe you can't even move the spots around on the board. So hopefully when we do this, the player base starts going up from that 100 people a day without us spending more money on marketing. That's kind of the thing that this is testing. And the big theory here is that the game as it is, no matter what, is primarily attractive to people because 10 cards get in a week, and that's good and keeps it at a certain level, but it also has a maximum amount of interaction that people can have. and that when we make it so that people can keep making more stuff, and that it's easier for, people make it so that they can make games for anybody and games for really hardcore fans, then it's kind of a self-perpetuating thing, right? Once that happens, which I genuinely think is, I think there's a really good chance that it does, but this is kind of contingent on that. If we see the signs that people are playing the game more, and that a couple features for example, when you first start the game out, saying hey, try out these player-made campaigns immediately. Should that work and get it so that people are really into it really quickly, then we re-release Collective as something like Collective Journeys or something like that. That's necessary for a marketing campaign. That's because it's an entertainment product like a movie. There's no way for somebody to come out with a movie and then 2 years later be like, hey, nobody watched this movie and you missed out. That doesn't happen. So, we do that. Just being honest, I spend 10 or 20 grand on the marketing campaign. That's about what it costs on the low end. And then it's a big success and everybody enjoys it and it's really fun. And then all those people who are trying it out and are like, oh, this is so crazy, it's so wacky, there's all these different worlds, and some of them are really awesome, and I want to make a deck that's just, the cards from this world or this realm. But even though I've played 20 of them, I really like this one. And, I really hate this other one, because these are the natural enemies of these realms and stuff when they actually land on Wanderstar. Then they're getting into multiplayer and they're, trying it out. And it becomes a sort of Avengers Smash Brothers thing where it makes sense because people actually saw all the different creative worlds in their own context where they made sense. They had time to explain their ideas without asking people to sit down and read a ton of text, but in an interactive format. Basically, a user-generated multiplayer card game, I think, is still possible, but it has to come after a user-generated single-player card game. I think that we've tried the other way a lot, and the fact that nothing that we do matters positively or negatively really, what other conclusion could you possibly come to, right? And yeah, I don't know. My feeling on this is ultimately kind of guilt, because although we are developing the game, the promise was always one that everybody involved wanted to believe, which is that we can, as a community, game design our way to success, right? And it's frustrating because I feel like that was not true, and that people have spent a lot of time and effort and a lot of artistic talent and a lot of jokes getting Collective to try to go up a hill that it can't go up. And that's really, it feels like it's my fault in a way. And because, like I said, when I show people Collective and I explain it to them right, they get it. They find it really interesting and fun, and they like the whole idea behind it. And then we had a monopoly on how people experience Collective, and we sort of had your content gatekept. We had your content hidden behind our content at the beginning, which was never as good. And Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's I put a lot of the blame on myself, and this is kind of my way to turn it around, hopefully. But it also means that it's kind of in your hands. And I'm optimistic because I think that the evidence is there that this is that you all are capable of doing something really, really appealing that gets people to understand why Collective is great. And I'm really looking forward to it. Thanks again for listening until the end. If you have any questions, you can let me know.